If you live in any sort of metropolitan area in the US, you've probably seen public benches with metal armrests down the middle. It may not strike you as particularly strange at first. In fact, you're probably just grateful to have somewhere to put your other elbow. But if you stop and think about it for a second, you start to realize that you didn't really see that growing up. At least I know I did. This is called hostile architecture. This is something that's been getting a lot more attention lately, largely due to a giant boulder painted like a rainbow that made the rounds on social media a few months back. This boulder was placed in an alcove in San Francisco, explicitly to keep homeless people from resting or sheltering there. This is only one example of hostile architecture. There are many others. Those weird benches that you can only really lean against, concrete spikes you sometimes see outside of buildings, iron bars on ledges. Sometimes these are designed just to keep skateboarders away, but generally speaking, it is designed to combat homeless people. Not homelessness, but homeless people. If this seems cruel, that's because it is. And it's not just cruel, it's also an expensive and backwards attempt to find a solution to a problem that could be solved fairly quickly and inexpensively. I'm talking, of course, about the housing crisis. Hello and everything. It's me again, Pimbles the Bread Boy. As you may have figured out, today's topic is on the housing crisis. I am really only going to address issues in America. It's the only country I feel particularly comfortable speaking on. This is a complex, multifaceted problem, and one that I make no pretensions to having the answers to. That's not true. I think I have some of the answers, but I just don't have any of the money. What I want to do right now, what I'd like to do for now, is bring some additional awareness to the problem and provide some fairly simple data that hopefully will allow us to empathize more with the plight of homeless people, maybe help us to consider some solutions or some steps we could take in addressing the problem. Along with that, I'm also going to explain why I believe that the current housing situation could cause a massive increase in homelessness in the next few years if we don't do something about it. An argument the right often likes to use to brush off subjects they don't want to address is the personal responsibility argument. So let me say right now up front that I am pro personal responsibility. I think people should be responsible. I think that's good. I think people should be responsible for the things that they can control and not try to avoid it. The problem with that approach is that it breaks down fairly quickly under any sort of scrutiny, and I came here to chew gum and scrutinize bad arguments, and I'm all out of my favorite gum. Approximately 550,000 people are estimated to be homeless in the United States. That number is certain to be much higher. The estimates that we have are based on head count, and a lot of people don't want to be counted or may simply be somewhere else on the night the cities go around counting people. I prefer to use more conservative numbers where I can, so I don't get accused of overstating a problem. So for the purposes of this essay, we're going to just use that 550,000 number with the agreement that it is probably much higher, but we just don't have the numbers to support that. Slightly over 500,000 people are living on the streets or in shelters, and less and less people have shelters as an escape these days. A number of shelters are only available for sober individuals, and of the chronically homeless population, approximately 2/3 have either drug addiction or alcohol addiction, which means that these shelters are unavailable to them. In some cases, notably in Los Angeles, shelters aren't even fulfilling their governmentally mandated requirements for occupancy in order to receive their funding. So a lot of these beds are empty, and a lot of these shelters are, to put it charitably, shitholes. Add to this the fact that we have the largest prison population in the world, and incarcerated people, or formerly incarcerated people, are nearly 10 times more likely to be homeless than their counterparts in society. And the picture begins to get very bleak. It's also likely to get worse in the future, which isn't a very encouraging thing to say, but I don't really see any way around it. So why don't homeless people just get homes, take some responsibility, get an apartment? According to a Parade article from 2018, somewhere between 20 and 40% of homeless people are employed, There's an estimate that says up to 60% have at least been employed at some point during a calendar year, but we'll go with the lower numbers. It's not like they're not earning money, and it's not like they're not trying to take responsibility. But getting an apartment is not quite as simple as just turning up with cash for the month, though. So let's take a look at what the actual barriers to entry are. I'm using a list that I've pulled from a couple of different apartment websites. So this is basically an FAQ for apartment hunters. It's fairly consistent across the board, and your experiences may vary, but I've rented a few apartments in big cities, and this is fairly consistent with my own experience. So, in order to rent an apartment, here are some of the things that you need in order to be a qualified applicant. Personal contact information. This is usually a cell phone number or an email address. Social security number. Vehicle identification, if relevant, and state ID or driver's license. Current and previous address, often with referrals from landlords. Current and previous employment information. Proof of income. Generally, you need to have been employed for 6 months or have at least 3 pay stubs. You also, generally speaking, need to make at least 3 times per month. You need to pay processing fees. This usually comes out to around $100 per application. Finally, you need first and last month's rent, often with a deposit. Sometimes the deposit serves as your last month's rent. And then what you have to do is wait. After all of this, assuming you can meet all the requirements, you just have to hope that there's not another applicant who makes more than you, or knows the landlord, or is just more qualified. Either way, that $100 is not refundable. Hopefully it's obvious what the problems here are. Even if you have the money, you may not be able to pass a credit check. A lot of people's credits were damaged in the financial crisis. A lot of people who have been to jail have bad credit. Certainly, if you've been to jail, it's going to affect your background check. You may not be able to make 3 times the rent. You may not be able to pay $4,500 up front. And even if you can, you may not be able to prove that you can continue to make $1,500 a month for rent. This is hard enough for people who are already living somewhere and aren't dealing with being homeless. I lived in LA and rented multiple places in LA, and I can say it is an extremely time-consuming and stressful process, and I didn't have the added burden of not knowing if I would pass certain checks. I also had a family who, if I needed help, would have been able to provide it, whether that is helping me pay a deposit up front or helping me move if I needed to move. So I mentioned that the housing crisis is going to get worse a bit ago, and I wanted to give a little bit of context to why I think that is. So now that we've explained some of the difficulties around getting an actual place to live, let's do some data analysis. Please do try to hide your arousal. In 2016, the average income for somebody renting their living space was $37,300, according to the Joint Center for Housing Studies report put out by Harvard in 2016. Included in that report is this particularly depressing bit of data. 64% of renters had low income, defined as 80% or less of the median income in their area, and 26% had extremely low income, defined as 30% or less of the median income in their area. Now, $37,300 may not seem like a lot, and it's not. And in order to illustrate just how little that actually is, I'm going to do some math, something that I am famously good at. So this data is based off of a Bank of America released budget document. This should effectively preempt any argument that I'm using biased sources. If you already started writing your comments about me using Marx as an example, then please just wait. So here's what the data says an average American pays. $1,483 a month for housing, $756 for transportation, but this also includes car payment, so I'm going to cut this number down significantly. They assume $483 for a car payment in this, but we're assuming you don't have one. But they also underestimate significantly how much your car insurance could cost. Depending on where you live and how good your credit is, it can range dramatically. As low as $75 a month in Maine with good credit, and as high as $870 a month in Michigan with bad credit. We'll just assume the national average of $135 a month here and use their assumption for gas usage. So that brings us to $262. $1,462 a month for health insurance, which is both an awful lot and kind of hilarious because a lot of people don't have health insurance, particularly the poorer ones of us. $618 for groceries, $100 a month for cable, $227 a month for entertainment. I'm going to be charitable here and put your cell phone bill under that number, just include it. $393 a month for a student loan payment. Now, they didn't actually include this number. I don't know why, but that is the national average. For those with student loan payments, it comes out to about $400 a month. So after we add up all of these numbers, it comes out to $4,544 a month. With our annual salary of $37,300, your monthly take home works out to about $2,400 a month. There's a gap there, obviously. Now we can take out insurance and student loans from these numbers and just kind of cut it down. We can even take off a couple $100s a month for groceries. And that still leaves us with about $2,800 worth of bills. Assuming you can somehow figure out a way to make those numbers work for you, you're still likely one moderate to severe incident away from total catastrophe. And remember, the HUD report that we referenced earlier said that about a quarter of us live in extreme poverty, so things are significantly worse for about a quarter of us. For the record, that rent number of $1,450 is not arbitrary. I pulled it from apartments.com. I also went looking and found a HuffPost article listing average rents for 50 major cities in the US. To be fair, they included Columbus and Milwaukee in this list, so I don't know how accurate it actually is when we're talking about major cities, but the number they came to was about $1,230 a month with an additional $150 to $180 of utilities. So that number is fairly accurate. Believe it or not, things do actually get worse from here. According to the Harvard study mentioned earlier, the number of apartments available for under $800 a month has decreased by 2.5 million units since 1990. Apartments available for under $850 a month have been cut in half, from approximately 40% of the total available property in 1990 to less than 20% in 2017. The price of rent adjusted for inflation has increased by 64% since 1960, while real income has only gone up by 18% in that same time period. More interesting to me is that in the time period of 2000 to 2010, the time of the Great Financial Crisis, housing prices went up 12%, whereas real income decreased by 7%. So forget keeping up with the Kardashians. The best most of us could hope for is a job that keeps up with inflation. The rising costs of rent can be tied pretty directly to the current increase in construction of luxury units. According to Rent Cafe, over 3/4 of all new multifamily housing units that were completed in 2015 were high-end rentals. That number increased to 80% in 2017 and 87% in 2018. So let's talk about these luxury apartments for a minute. It's estimated that in New York City, around 250,000 housing units are vacant. And of the 16,200 high-end or luxury units that have been completed in the last 4 years, around 4,000 of them have never even been sold, let alone occupied. In California, there's a shortfall of housing for renters with extremely low income of around 1 million units. Of very low income renters, there's a shortfall of about 3.5 million units. Low income, you're short about 1 million units again, and moderate income is short 61,000 units. There's a 300,000 unit surplus for above moderate income renters, and nearly 100,000 vacant units in Los Angeles alone. The number of Californians who qualify as cost burdened, i.e. paying more than 30% of their monthly income on rent, is 54%. But for renters at moderate income levels or below, that number is 81%. I've obviously only highlighted a couple of major cities here, but honestly we could spend hours looking at basically all major cities in the US, and at the end we'd still come to the same conclusion that hopefully you've arrived at by now. Shit is fucked. But as bad and as bleak as things currently appear, there are a few things that I think would be worth keeping in mind as we attempts to move forward and deal with this issue. There's clearly sufficient housing space currently extant in the United States. It could be put to use to house people. It just isn't yet. How do we rectify this? Well, one approach might be to reduce requirements for people to qualify for housing. Current requirements are pretty exclusionary and are hard for people to meet even if they aren't living at the bottom of the social scale. Reducing or eliminating some of these requirements could make it much easier for homeless people to qualify for housing. Eliminating the background check or credit check, or at least weighting them much less heavily, could be a significant improvement. Another potential and much more radical solution would be to simply seize property that's currently unoccupied and provide it to people who need shelter. According to a study done by Alan Malik at the Lincoln Institute for Land Management, there are around 11 million vacant properties in the US as of 2016, of which 6 million are considered other vacant. In this case, that means they are unoccupied but are not listed for rent or for sale. We could just take those and make them available for people. Even in large cities like Los Angeles or New York City, the number of vacant units dramatically outnumbers the people who would need places to live. So we're not going to have to move them to Des Moines or some other Midwestern hellscape. The simple fact is that we continue to build new, unnecessary luxury housing that is out of reach for basically anybody that wasn't already living in luxury housing, while at the same time allowing existing affordable properties to decay or be torn down or be made unaffordable due to renovations. We need to shift our focus away from building new and instead spend more time worrying about how to fill the properties that we already have. I don't know exactly what the best solution to this is. It could be providing underwriting for landlords so that they can do renovations without raising rent. It could be incentivizing contractors to work on properties that are currently in disrepair and make them clean and safe rather than demolishing and building new. The problem is not a shortage of housing. The problem is a shortage of compassion and empathy. And to me, this is symptomatic of capitalism. There's very little to no incentive under capitalism to be altruistic or act for the common or greater good. I think it's time for a change. If you watched all the way to the end, then I'm impressed. You have a high pain tolerance. But thank you. And if you thought that any of this was valuable or worth knowing, then if you would share it with friends or people that you think might care about this sort of thing, it would mean a lot to me. I have an incredibly small platform. I still think what I have to say is important. So, if you do too, then you can help me have a bigger platform. And that would make me feel good. Until next time, until next time.